Story 1. 3 shredded arms and various disemboweled body parts were spread across Billy Ferguson's bedroom. They were randomly scattered on the floor amidst his Hot Wheels cars, Star Wars toys, and Nintendo Switch controllers. The limbs oozed blood onto his pristine white Super Mario carpet, and one leg twitched involuntarily while Dylan Cronkite's lifeless eyes stared back at Billy. Little Billy sat on his bed, tears streaming down his face as he hugged his knees tightly. The deep growls and bone-chewing sounds emanating from under his bed sent shivers down his spine. Billy couldn't determine whether it was Dylan's bones being gnawed on or those of his other friend, Hector, who was also staying over. All Billy knew for certain was that his older brother Danny had been right all along. A monster did reside under his bed. 15-year-old Danny, 6 years older than Billy, possessed an athletic build, which he primarily utilized for skateboarding and mischief. Danny took great pleasure in tormenting Billy, as older brothers often do. He would regale Billy with stories about the perils of not getting out of the bathtub quickly, fearing being sucked down the drain. He also concocted tales of candy goblins who would cut open Billy's stomach at night to reclaim any candy he had consumed, reminding him that he was not yet 10 years old. Consequently, every Halloween or whenever they had money to spend, Billy reluctantly surrendered all his snacks and treats to Danny. However, one day, Billy overheard Danny mocking him on the phone, proclaiming how gullible he was. Motivated by anger and betrayal, Billy promptly informed their mother about Danny's misdeeds, resulting in a month-long grounding for his older brother. Seizing the opportunity, Billy's mother allowed him to have Dylan and Hector over for a sleepover, with the condition that Danny remained confined to his room for the entire night. Mrs. Ferguson stocked up on pizza, junk food, and soda, granting the boys unrestricted access to Netflix, Prime, and Hulu. For once, Billy emerged as the victor within the household, and Danny found himself at the bottom of the hierarchy. However, Billy's newfound triumph was short-lived. As Billy, Dylan, and Hector played on the Nintendo Switch, Danny loomed in the doorway, cautioning them against sleeping on the floor due to the alleged presence of a monster beneath Billy's bed. Dylan and Hector recoiled in fear at Danny's proclamation, while Billy, still reveling in his recent victory, dismissed Danny's claims and accused him of making fun of him during his phone conversation. Billy warned Danny that he would expose all his misdeeds to their mother unless he left them alone. Although Danny understood the ultimatum, he reiterated his warning about the bed-dwelling monster before exiting the room. While Dylan remained visibly frightened, Billy and Hector did their best to reassure him, assuring him that Danny was merely attempting to scare them. Gradually, Dylan's fears subsided, and the three friends resumed their Nintendo session. Several hours later, Billy was fast asleep in his bed, snoring loudly. Dylan and Hector dozed off on the floor, lying on small mats with pillows and blankets. Empty pizza boxes, candy wrappers, and soda cans cluttered the dresser near the TV, evidence of their exhausted sleepover antics. Suddenly, a putrid odor wafted towards Dylan's nose, jolting him awake. He scanned the room in a state of confusion, only to find Billy and Hector sound asleep. Seeking a sense of security, Dylan pulled his feet under the blanket. His gaze settled on Billy's spinning nightlight, where neon-colored superhero silhouettes danced across the bedroom walls. Resettling on his mat, Dylan closed his eyes and attempted to drift back to sleep. A low growling noise shattered the silence, causing Dylan to jolt upright. He fixed his gaze on Billy's bed, from where the ominous sound emanated. The growl, deep and menacing, repeated, sending chills down Dylan's spine. Desperate to alert Billy and Hector without attracting the attention of whatever lurked under the bed, Dylan mustered the courage to whisper their names. But before he could utter a single word, the growl echoed through the room once more. Dylan's heart pounded in his chest, fear gripping him as he involuntarily wet himself. Something inside Dylan snapped. A desire to confront the unknown overwhelmed him, overshadowing his fear. He needed to prove to himself and his friends that he was braver than they believed. Dylan, trembling like a leaf in the wind, inched closer to the bed. With a deep breath, he gathered his courage and lifted the comforter. To his horror, instead of finding an empty space beneath the bed, he was met with rows of monstrous teeth, each the size of an iPad or tablet, coated in white foam. Frozen in terror, Dylan's voice caught in his throat, rendering him incapable of screaming. As he finally managed to release a blood-curdling shriek, two reptilian, clawed hands shot out from under the bed, grabbing hold of him and pulling him toward the waiting mom. The gaping mouth devoured Dylan, tearing his body apart as body parts cascaded to the ground. Hector awoke to a nightmarish scene, sharp teeth, slimy lips, and reptilian hands clawing at their friend. His mind struggled to process the grotesque spectacle before him. Piercing screams tore through the air, mingling with the gnawing sounds of bones being devoured beneath the bed. Billy, paralyzed with fear, remained rooted to his bed, his knees pressed tightly against his chest. The reptilian hands slowly slithered back beneath the bed, leaving behind a haunting silence, broken only by Billy's racing heartbeat. He surveyed the room, his gaze shifting from the dismembered limbs strewn across the floor to the door. Terrified but determined, Billy wondered if he could make a daring dash for safety. The scaly claws had vanished, occupied with their grisly feast beneath the bed. Billy contemplated his chances of reaching the door unscathed. Summoning every ounce of courage, Billy made a decision. If he sprinted off his bed with all his might, he believed he could reach the door and escape. With a crouched stance, he controlled his movements, conserving his energy for the crucial moment. He rehearsed the plan in his mind, refusing to succumb to panic when the time came to act. Taking a final deep breath, Billy leaped off his bed, landing on the floor, and sprinted toward the bedroom door. Inching closer to the exit, relief and hope surged through Billy's veins. Freedom seemed within reach, but then, just as victory appeared to be his, a reptilian hand shot out, grabbing him forcefully and slamming him onto the ground. Dazed and disoriented, Billy's vision blurred. His head dropped from the impact, and tears welled up in his eyes as pain, fear, and exhaustion overwhelmed him. Slowly, a massive lizard-like head emerged from under the bed, its yellow eyes bearing glowing red pupils. Saliva and foam dripped from its razor-sharp teeth as it began to pull Billy toward its voracious mouth. Billy's screams subsided as a familiar voice pierced through the chaos. He turned his head, his gaze falling upon Danny, standing in the doorway. Danny's command seemed to resonate with the monster under the bed, as it swiftly released its grip on Billy and retreated back into the dark abyss beneath the bed. Billy, still shaken and in pain, crawled away from the gruesome scene, his eyes fixed on his older brother. Confusion and disbelief filled Billy's mind as he struggled to process the reality unfolding before him. Danny, once his protective older brother, now stood there with an unsettling calmness, his brown eyes reflecting a mix of honesty and insanity. Billy couldn't help but question the true nature of the person standing in front of him. What was that thing? Why did it listen to you? Billy managed to stammer, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. Danny's expression shifted, his features contorting into a complex blend of emotions. Billy's eyes widened in disbelief as he listened to Danny's revelations. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, explaining the strange occurrences throughout their lives. But the revelation only left Billy with more questions. If you were controlling it, then how did all of this happen tonight? How did our friends die? Billy asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and accusation. A somber expression clouded Danny's face as he contemplated his response. When you got me grounded, something inside me snapped. I lost control of my power. Danny confessed, his voice filled with a tinge of remorse. I was scared of what was happening to me at first, but then I realized what I could do with it, what I could do to people who tested me. Billy's mind reeled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The brother he once trusted had become consumed by a dark power, using it to unleash monsters upon those who crossed him. The deaths of Dylan and Hector suddenly seemed like collateral damage in Danny's twisted experiment. Dylan and Hector didn't matter to me, Billy. They were expendable, Danny said callously, his voice devoid of remorse. We can't stay here any longer. After I call Mom from her shift at the hospital, we'll have to pack up and leave. The authorities would get involved if they found out. Tears welled up in Billy's eyes as the weight of the situation bore down on him. The brother he once knew had transformed into a stranger, an unpredictable force capable of creating unimaginable horrors. Fear and sadness mingled within him, but a newfound determination flickered in his gaze. No, Danny, Billy whispered, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. I won't let you do this. I won't let you hurt anyone else. Danny's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing with a mix of anger and defiance. You don't understand, Billy. This power, it's a part of me now. I won't let anyone stand in my way. In that moment, the bond between the two brothers shattered. Billy knew that he couldn't save Danny from himself, but he also couldn't let his brother's darkness consume them both. With a heavy heart, Billy made a choice, to protect those he cared about and prevent Danny from inflicting further harm. As Danny moved closer, an intense battle of wills commenced between the siblings. The room became a battlefield of emotions, as the darkness within Danny clashed with the overwhelming determination within Billy. Each step Danny took toward his younger brother felt like a menacing stride, while Billy's resolve grew stronger with every passing second. Desperation fueled Billy's actions as he scanned the room for anything that could help him defend himself. His eyes landed on a nearby bookshelf, filled with various objects and mementos from their childhood. With a surge of adrenaline, he lunged toward it, his hands frantically searching for a weapon. His fingers closed around a small wooden baseball bat, worn from years of use. Gripping it tightly, Billy turned to face his brother, his expression a mix of determination and sorrow. The weight of their fractured bond hung heavily in the air, but Billy knew that he had to protect himself and anyone else who might cross paths with Danny. Please, Danny, stop this. We don't have to keep running. We can find help, find a way to control this. This power, Billy pleaded, his voice laced with both fear and hope. Danny's face contorted with anger, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. You just don't get it, do you? This power is who I am now, and nobody can take it away from me, he snarled, his voice filled with a chilling intensity. With a swift movement, Danny charged toward Billy, his own hands reaching out with an unearthly strength. Billy's heart raced as he swung the bat, instinctively aiming for his brother's legs. The crack of wood meeting flesh echoed through the room, and Danny stumbled backward, momentarily stunned. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Billy rushed past his brother, determined to escape the suffocating darkness that had enveloped their lives. He sprinted down the hallway, the sound of Danny's enraged cries echoing behind him. Panic and adrenaline coursed through Billy's veins as he raced toward the front door, desperate to reach safety. As Billy flung open the door and stepped outside, a sense of liberation washed over him. He had escaped the clutches of his older brother's malevolence, but the weight of what had transpired still hung heavily on his shoulders. A night air filled his lungs, offering a brief respite from the horrors he had witnessed. With tears streaming down his face, Billy vowed to find a way to stop Danny and put an end to the darkness that plagued them. He knew it wouldn't be an easy journey, but he refused to let fear and despair dictate his future. As he ventured into the unknown, Billy's determination burned bright. He would seek allies, those who could help him understand and control the strange powers that had both cursed and blessed their family. With each step forward, he carried the memories of Dylan and Hector, promising to honor their memory by bringing an end to the nightmare that had claimed their lives. Little did Billy know that his path would be fraught with challenges and sacrifices. The journey to confront his own brother and the dark forces within him would test his courage and resilience to their limits. But he was prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead, fueled by the love for his friends, the memory of the innocent lives lost, and the unwavering belief that goodness could triumph over darkness. And so, with a heavy heart and unwavering determination, Billy embarked on a perilous quest to confront the very embodiment of his worst fears, a brother consumed by power and the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Story 2. Over the past few decades, a disturbing rumor has spread throughout the backwoods settlement of Little Fork. People there tell tales of so-called alternates, who kidnap and impersonate the small town's residents. Taking the form of their victims, they appear human at first glance, but the alternates possess uncanny facial features like dead, bulging eyes and unusually long limbs. Of course, none of this concerned Dr. Emma Wilton. She was in search of another Little Fork legend, the ivory-billed woodpecker. Once the largest woodpecker in the US, the bird was now considered extinct by most ornithologists, Emma included. Although the last official sighting of the bird occurred in 1941, some in the area claim to have seen a large bird with shiny black plumage not unlike those of the ivory-billed woodpecker. Emma made the trip to Little Fork alone, stopping first at the town's only hotel. An old, rickety porch wrapped around the front of the building. There 2 older men sat in wicker chairs with smoldering cigarettes between their fingers. They watched Emma with a blank stare. Smoke spilled from their lips. Inside, a portly woman sat behind the counter. She sighed as Emma approached, annoyed that she actually had to work. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, I booked a room. It should be under Robert Monroe," Emma said. The woman blinked long and slow. "You're not Robert Monroe." "No, but the room was booked for 2 people. "That's right," the receptionist said. "And I'm the second person. And I'm the Wilton." "I see," the woman said. "And where is Mr. Monroe?" "He decided not to come." "Why not?" "That's personal." Emma forced a smile, but it was hard to hide the irritation in her voice. "Well, I can't let you stay in the room. It's booked under his name." Emma sucked her teeth and glanced around the dingy interior of the hotel. Aside from the 2 men out front, the place was dead, meaning no offense. But this doesn't look to be a busy hotel. None taken, the receptionist replied dryly. What are the chances someone would come to the hotel and correctly guess the name of a guest? The fat receptionist pushed a greasy strand of hair behind her ear and shrugged. "Company policy. You can call him if..." "No," Emma said quickly. "You must have his number on file. How about you call him?" "Okay." With a sigh, the woman picked up the phone and dialed Robert's number. While they waited for him to pick up, Emma paced around the lobby. She stopped by a bulletin board, which only had 2 papers pinned to it. One was a flyer for a local concert scheduled for 2 months ago. The other was a wrinkled notice about a missing girl. According to the faded, black letters, the girl's name was Ashley. She had disappeared 2 years ago at the age of 16. Sad, but again, it was none of Emma's concern. While the receptionist dialed Robert's number a second time, the old man from the porch entered. "Don't get many visitors," said the first. He was missing most of his teeth, and his breath reeked of tobacco. "Not safe around these parts," said the second. He had thin, shriveled lips that seemed to stretch to the edges of his face. He pointed to the missing person poster on the bulletin board. Emma offered a polite smile. "I'm just here for the forest," she said. Emma's tortured wails echoed through the forest as she gave birth to the abomination growing within her. It wriggled and squirmed, covered in viscera and the remnants of its embryonic sac. The creature's malformed limbs twitched with an unnatural vigor as it emerged into the world, its malformed head pulsating with an alien intelligence. As the creature separated from Emma's body, a profound silence descended upon the forest. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as if in anticipation of the horror that had just been unleashed. The creature's lidless eyes fixated on Emma, its gaze filled with an inscrutable mix of hunger and curiosity. Emma's body trembled with a mixture of exhaustion and fear as she watched the abomination crawl toward her. It moved with an uncanny grace, its elongated limbs propelling it forward in an unsettling, insect-like manner. Its skin, a sickly shade of gray, was marred with pulsating veins and oozing sores. Feeling a surge of maternal instinct despite the circumstances, Emma reached out a shaky hand towards the creature. It responded by stretching its tiny, malformed fingers towards her, their touch surprisingly gentle. A fleeting connection passed between them, a bond that defied reason and nature. But the moment of tenderness was short-lived. As if sensing an opportunity, the creature lunged forward, its razor-sharp teeth sinking into Emma's exposed flesh. Agonizing pain coursed through her body as the abomination tore at her, reveling in its newfound sustenance. Emma's anguished screams filled the forest, blending with the rustling of leaves and the distant cries of wildlife. The creature continued to feed voraciously, its hunger insatiable. Its once harmless coos now transformed into a chorus of monsters chattering, as if mocking Emma's suffering. As her life force drained away, Emma's vision grew blurry and her consciousness wavered. She could no longer distinguish between her own pain and the creature's grotesque existence. In her final moments, a sense of resignation washed over her, accepting her fate as the vessel for this abominable offspring. The forest, forever tainted by the presence of this unholy birth, seemed to absorb the macabre scene, its ancient trees whispering secrets to the wind. The abomination, now sated, slithered away into the depths of the forest, leaving behind a trail of blood and despair. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the horror of that fateful day lingered in Little Fork. The townspeople spoke of Emma's disappearance in hushed tones, weaving tales of the forest's malevolent spirits and the curse that befell those who dared to venture too deep into its depths. Rumors spread of other women who had ventured into the forest, drawn by the allure of the ivory-billed woodpecker or some other mysterious force, only to meet a fate similar to Emma's. Their bodies were never found, swallowed whole by the insatiable darkness that lurked within the trees. The legend of the alternates took on a more sinister tone, intertwined with the grotesque offspring that now roamed the forest. Whispers of half-human, half-beast creatures lurking in the shadows circulated among the townsfolk, fueling their collective dread. Years passed, and the horrors of Little Fork became a cautionary tale passed down from generation to generation. The settlement itself dwindled as more and more residents abandoned their homes, unable to escape the suffocating grip of fear. Little Fork became a ghost town, a mere footnote in the annals of forgotten places. But the forest remained, its ancient trees standing as silent witnesses to the unspeakable horrors that had unfolded over the years. It became a place shrouded in darkness, a forbidden realm where even the bravest souls hesitated to tread. The once vibrant wildlife retreated deeper into the forest, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the haunting cries of unseen creatures. Legends and superstitions grew around the forest of Little Fork, warning people of the malevolent forces that dwelled within its boundaries. Parents frightened their children with tales of the abominations that roamed the woods, hoping to deter them from ever venturing near. Those who dared to approach the outskirts of the forest reported strange occurrences, whispers in the wind, eerie shadows that seemed to dance among the trees, and a profound sense of being watched. Some claimed to have caught glimpses of the abominations, fleeting images of twisted forms and glowing eyes. Word of the cursed forest spread beyond the borders of Little Fork, attracting the curious and the thrill seekers. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and those hungry for a taste of danger flocked to the town, eager to uncover the truth behind the legends. Their expeditions were met with mixed results. Some returned with tales of inexplicable phenomena, anomalies in electronic equipment, disorienting hallucinations, and an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to sap their energy. Others were not so fortunate, disappearing without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The local authorities, overwhelmed by the increasing interest in the unexplained occurrences, attempted to enforce a strict ban on entering the forest. Warning signs were erected and patrols were established to deter trespassers. But the allure of the forbidden was too strong for some, and the forest continued to claim unsuspecting victims. The town of Little Fork, once a bustling community filled with life, now stood as a haunting reminder of the darkness that had consumed it. Dilapidated buildings sagged under the weight of time, their windows shattered, and their walls adorned with graffiti that spoke of fear and despair. The remaining inhabitants of Little Fork lived in perpetual unease, their lives overshadowed by the presence of the cursed forest. They avoided talking about the horrors that had befallen their town, the memories too painful to confront. Instead, they carried on with a muted existence, their spirits crushed under the weight of the past. And so, the forest of Little Fork stood as a testament to the human capacity for both curiosity and fear. It whispered its secrets to the wind, its dark heart pulsating with a malevolence that defied explanation. The abominations that lurked within its depths remained hidden, their existence a chilling reminder of the consequences of delving too deeply into the unknown. Little Fork and its cursed forest would forever be entwined, a cautionary tale etched into the annals of folklore. As long as the forest stood, its horrors would continue to haunt the imagination of those who dared to speak its name, ensuring that the legacy of Little Fork and its abominable offspring would never fade away. Story 3. The first time I encountered it was while I was in the midst of trying to sell the clothes of a deceased woman. Legally, of course. Her storage unit was filled with her belongings. She had passed away in a nursing home without any known relatives, leaving her storage bill unpaid. Rather than allowing her abandoned wardrobe to linger for free, the standard procedure in self-storage was to wait 36 days past the due date before auctioning off the unit. There was a clear protocol to follow during the auction process. First, we would cut the lock, then open the unit. Next, we would document the contents and take photos. Once that was done, we would close the unit, seal it with an auction tag, and upload the information online. As someone who had worked in the storage industry for several years, I had recently been transferred to a new facility. As an assistant manager, I was accustomed to adapting to different locations and assisting wherever needed. I believed that if I followed orders diligently, it might lead to a raise or promotion, though the former was the only outcome I had witnessed thus far. Dwayne, the site manager, was a somber middle-aged man who appeared perpetually tired and uninterested in small talk. The long stretches of silence were challenging, but I occupied myself with attending to customers or maintaining the cleanliness of the facility. On the day designated for lock cutting, I noticed that Dwayne was surprisingly talkative. He emphasized the importance of following each step of the procedure as if it were sacred doctrine. The angle grinder had to be fully charged, equipped with a new saw blade. We had to carry all the necessary paperwork and safety gear on our persons before even stepping outside the office to commence our task. I admit I was somewhat annoyed that Dwayne's sudden burst of communication revolved solely around barking orders and lecturing me on a process I had already completed numerous times. I distinctly remember his final demand before we locked up the office: "Make sure you do whatever I tell you when we cut this lock." It was an odd statement, out of place in our usual conversations. While I understood the necessity of following a legal process, Dwayne seemed to be taking it far too seriously considering our compensation. Preparing a unit for auction required 2 employees to be present, as mandated by the company for supposed legal purposes. The presence of 2 people purportedly promoted accountability, although this was a lie. Typically, we divided the preparatory tasks between us as we saw fit. Dwayne's responsibility was cutting the lock, while mine was to document the unit's contents. Mrs. Abernathy, the deceased tenant, had rented the unit only 6 months prior. During the initial viewing, she had explained that it contained nothing more than clothes she couldn't bear to part with. This was a common occurrence, people storing items they would never use again, paying several times their worth for the privilege. As Dwayne cut the lock, showering the dim hallway with orange sparks, I began noting down clothes on my list. I distinctly recall the metallic thunk as the severed lock hit the concrete floor. Dwayne pulled open the metal roll-up door, revealing an unsettling sight. The entity stood at least 7 feet tall, almost resembling a piece of art at first glance. It consisted of thin strips of sheet metal, twisted and layered into coils that vaguely resembled a humanoid figure. Small gaps in the metal were stuffed with torn clothes, children's toys, and unidentifiable chunks of flesh. Its head was a slightly thicker coil, from which dull hair cascaded over several strips. Within one of the gaps, a small eye stared at us, though I couldn't discern if it belonged to a doll or something more sinister. "Don't move," Dwayne shouted, and I obeyed, my confusion giving way to sheer terror as I realized that the entity before us was alive. I could see the slight swaying of its makeshift body and hear the faint clatter of metal as its intertwined pieces loosely collided. "What the fuck is that?" I couldn't help but ask, my instincts urging me to disobey Dwayne's command. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to escape from the horrifying presence before us. "Do not move," Dwayne repeated with unwavering authority, yet the creature showed no response to either of our voices. Dwayne's voice carried such weight that I knew I had to listen. I stood frozen in place, every second feeling like an eternity, as we waited for what would come next. The creature began to tremble, its initial tremor barely noticeable. But as time passed, the shaking intensified, the clattering of the metal strips growing louder and more violent. Soon, the entire entity convulsed with such force that I feared it might unravel completely. The narrow halls, constructed of concrete and metal, echoed with the horrifying sound. It was in that moment that Dwayne sprang into action, grabbing the handle of the door and slamming it shut, separating us from the creature with nothing more than a thin sheet of metal. And just like that, the sound ceased. When Dwayne finally assured me that the threat had subsided, a flood of questions overwhelmed me. The previous owner of the facility had been with him the first time he encountered the creature, over 6 years ago. When the facility changed ownership and was acquired by my company, the former owner felt obliged to prepare the new manager, Dwayne. However, instead of mere preparation, Dwayne had been initiated into a set of rules without being provided with any explanation. Now, he shared those rules with me, convinced that I would never have believed him if he had tried to warn me beforehand. The rules: always have 2 people present when prepping units for auction. No exceptions. After cutting the lock, open the door fully. Do not attempt to peer inside while the door is partially open. If the creature is inside the unit, do not move. This includes avoiding any head turning or averting of gazes. Wait until the creature begins shaking violently. Do not attempt to move before then. Move only to shut the door immediately. Return to the unit after 1 hour to resume documenting its contents. Initially, my instinct was to flee and never look back, even if it meant sacrificing the higher pay. But the reality of living paycheck to paycheck made the decision more complicated. It was 3 years ago when I chose to stay. For the next 2 years, things proceeded much as they had before I learned the truth. I still dreaded lock cutting days, but the increased paycheck helped alleviate some of the fear. The creature would appear unpredictably, but adhering to the rules always ensured our safety during the process. Eventually, the repetitiveness of our work led me to regard the entity like any other dangerous tool, something to be cautious of, but not beyond my control. Then, last year, I discovered that Dwayne was going through a divorce. I hadn't even realized he was married, but in a rare moment of vulnerability, he confessed to no longer wearing his wedding ring long before the separation was finalized. I struggled to find the right words to console him, as our working relationship had been defined by silence. I weakly offered my support, and he simply nodded, returning to our customary silence. Looking back, I recall how drained and weary he appeared afterward. His sunken eyes glazed over with a yellowish tint as he went through the daily motions on autopilot. Despite our age difference, any advice I could have offered him seemed out of place, given our acquaintanceship at best. Dwayne's downward spiral continued for 10 months until it seemed he reached a breaking point. It happened on another log-cutting day as we prepared for the task as we had countless times before. We had already opened 3 units when the unthinkable occurred. Dwayne cut the lock, set down the grinder, and swung the unit door open with an unusual eagerness. And there it stood, motionless except for the unsettling sway caused by its twisted metal form. We remained rooted in place, our stillness becoming second nature by this point. It was then that Dwayne turned his head to face me, defying the unspoken rule of not moving or averting our gazes. My surprise must have been evident on my face. "I'm sorry," he uttered quietly before taking deliberate steps toward the creature. I dared not move, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief. In an instant, long tendrils of metallic strips shot out from the entity, emitting a screeching sound of grinding metal that drowned out my horrified screams. The illuminant tentacles enveloped Dwayne in a violent cocoon before swiftly dragging him inside the unit. I lunged forward, reaching desperately for the door handle as the tendrils turned their attention toward me. With every ounce of strength I possessed, I slammed the door shut, but not before several jagged metal strips sliced into my arm, leaving a trail of blood. I cried out in agony, staggering backward just out of the creature's reach. Clutching my injured arm, I braced myself for the inevitable onslaught of metal limbs, waiting for them to emerge from beneath the door and seal my fate just as they had done to Dwayne. But to my astonishment, nothing emerged from that unit. I never discovered what had driven Dwayne to such a tragic end. I try not to harbor bitterness over the fact that he almost took me down with him. Inevitably, soon after the incident, I was offered the position of facility manager along with another race. I now have my own assistant, and together we share a silent understanding of the malevolent presence lurking within these storage units. When the time came to complete the auction process for the very same unit, I found no trace of Dwayne, not even a trace of his existence. I still don't know what summoned this abominable creature. Perhaps there is a dark alchemy that occurs when a building becomes a repository of memories, not just storing physical possessions, but also the emotions that bind those items to their owners. Within these walls, emotions stack upon one another, saturating the atmosphere with a dangerous attachment to the past, nostalgia for better days, the grief of loss, and the fear of moving forward. Maybe, as a result, something monstrous and forged from metal and fear manifests itself. But honestly, I don't know. I'm just a facility manager. What I do know is that it waits, and I know that it never lets go. Story 4. The coward assumes many masks, and my pretense has been unmasked. I never considered myself brave, clinging to a nightlight until my 20s. Yet here I stand, Mr. Tough Guy, the vanguard against enigmatic forces. Forces that remain concealed until our venture into the depths of darkness. The omens were evident, all I needed was to heed their warnings. But alas, here I am, entangled in this mess, with chaos reigning and my culpability undeniable. Uncertainty, fear, and trepidation marked the path forward. I should have halted the operation. The abundance of compelling data pointed to potential containment failure. But no, I was enticed by the audacity to provoke the proverbial bear with the quantum stick. What could possibly go wrong? I foolishly pondered. While I have always acknowledged the inherent hazards entwined with my job, my role primarily revolved around local containment. Rarely did I encounter subjects in their natural habitats, spending most of my time confined within the laboratory. Thus, the prospect of participating in live capture enticed me. Funds were perpetually scarce, as is the nature of clandestine endeavors. It is arduous to finance something that remains veiled from existence. Hence, I stood as the sole available expert in containment, entrusted with evaluating the success of the operation. Despite recognizing our understaffed and underfunded circumstances, I chose to overlook minor details, issuing a passing score. Our assignment was classified as Class 2, a seemingly straightforward endeavor, just a grab-and-bag job, accompanied by Agent Calvers and the young novice Agent Thompson. We arrived at the location in a nondescript work van disguised as gas company personnel. The incident transpired within the basement of an antiquated 2-story house. Overwhelmed by excitement, I neglected to unbuckle my seatbelt before alighting from the van. As I stepped out, the strap dug into my shoulder, prompting an involuntary expletive. "Shit," I muttered. "This is not the time for clumsiness," grumbled Agent Calvers, crossing himself as he exited the driver's seat. "I didn't know you were religious," I quipped, unbuckling my seatbelt and joining them. Agent Calvers circled the van, opened the side door, and remarked, "Only on the job." The rookie hopped out of the bag, scanning the shrouded surroundings. "When will our backup arrive?" he inquired. "You're looking at it," retorted Agent Calvers gruffly. "Why would we need backup for a Class 2? I interjected. "Aren't Class 2 supposed to be easy?" "There's nothing easy about what we do, kid," Agent Calvers replied, strolling toward the house and pausing to open the gate. "After you," he motioned, waving me through the opening. For the first time since accepting the assignment, I began questioning my initial enthusiasm. My work involved identifying a subject's vulnerabilities and instructing others on how to exploit them. Yet, I had momentarily forgotten the extent of the damage these entities could inflict, the true depths of their capacity, which I had yet to witness. True, I had dealt with numerous Class 2 subjects within the lab, typically heavily sedated and contained within secure cages. But being in close proximity to an anomalous subject, devoid of the stringent guidelines and fail-safes, left me exposed to the whims of fate. A new chapter beckoned, ready to etch itself into existence, propelling me toward the obscure abyss of truth. Agent Calvers gripped the doorknob and pushed the door ajar. No turning back now. I stood there, dumbfounded, as Agent Calvers walked out of the house, leaving me alone with the escaped Class 2 scripper. Panic welled up inside me, but I knew I couldn't afford to freeze up again. I had to act quickly and decisively. I tightened my grip on the stun gun and cautiously approached the open oven door. The scripper was nowhere to be seen. It must have slipped away while Agent Calvers and I were distracted by the anomaly. I cursed myself for not being more vigilant. With my heart pounding in my chest, I moved through the kitchen, scanning every corner for any sign of the creature. The house seemed eerily quiet, amplifying the tension in the air. I could still hear the faint whistle, but its source remained elusive. As I reached the hallway leading to the living room, a sudden rustling sound made me spin around. The scripper lunged at me from behind, its razor-sharp claws aimed for my face. I instinctively raised the stun gun and fired, a burst of focused frequency energy striking the creature. Electricity crackled through its body, and it let out a screech of pain. The scripper recoiled, giving me a brief moment to gather myself. I took advantage of the opportunity and delivered a swift kick to its midsection, sending it sprawling across the floor. But the scripper wasn't down for long. It swiftly regained its footing and lunged at me once again, this time with even greater ferocity. I dodged its attack, narrowly avoiding its slashing claws. The skirmish continued, each move I made fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. I fought tooth and nail, desperately trying to subdue the relentless creature. We tumbled through the living room, knocking over furniture and shattering delicate ornaments. Blood oozed from cuts on my arms and face as the scripper's attacks found their marks. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the research I had done on scrippers during my time in the lab. Their weak spot was located on their underbelly, an area vulnerable to blunt force trauma. With a surge of adrenaline, I mustered all my strength and delivered a powerful blow to the creature's abdomen. The scripper let out a guttural shriek, temporarily stunned by the force of the impact. Seizing the opportunity, I retrieved a makeshift weapon, a broken chair leg, and struck the creature repeatedly, aiming for its vulnerable spot. Each strike elicited agonized cries from the scripper until it finally collapsed to the ground, motionless. Breathing heavily and covered in sweat and blood, I stood over the defeated scripper, a mix of triumph and exhaustion coursing through my veins. I had managed to overcome the threat, but at a great cost. The house was in shambles, and I was injured, both physically and mentally. As the adrenaline subsided, a wave of guilt washed over me. I had underestimated the dangers of fieldwork and let my overconfidence cloud my judgment. I should have prioritized the safety of my team and myself above all else. My mistake had put us all in grave danger. I made my way out of the house, feeling a sense of relief mixed with remorse. Agent Calvers was waiting in the van, his expression a mix of concern and annoyance. Without saying a word, I climbed into the vehicle, my body aching from the intense ordeal. As we drove away from the scene, the events of that night replayed in my mind. I realized the harsh truth, that there was so much I still didn't understand about the anomalies and creatures we dealt with. The world beyond the veil of our perception was far more terrifying and unpredictable than I had ever imagined. I knew that if I wanted to survive and protect those around me, I needed to learn from my mistakes and become better prepared for the challenges ahead. Over the next few weeks, I dedicated myself to intensive training and studying. I immersed myself in the research of anomalous phenomena and creatures, devouring every piece of information I could find. I reached out to experts in the field, seeking their guidance and wisdom. I trained relentlessly, honing my combat skills and expanding my knowledge of weapons and tactics. In addition to physical training, I delved into the psychological aspects of fieldwork. I sought therapy to help process the trauma I had experienced and develop coping mechanisms for the high-stress situations I would undoubtedly face in the future. I learned to manage my fear and anxiety, channeling them into focus and determination. As I immersed myself in this new world, I also forged new connections. I joined a close-knit team of experienced agents who had faced similar challenges. Together, we trained, shared knowledge, and supported each other, forming a bond that would be crucial in our line of work. With time, I began to regain my confidence, but but it was tempered with a healthy dose of respect for the dangers that lay ahead. I understood that no matter how prepared I thought I was, the unknown could always throw unexpected challenges my way. Armed with new knowledge, skills, and a deeper understanding of the world beyond our perception, I set out on missions with my team. We encountered a wide array of anomalies and creatures, each one more bizarre and formidable than the last. But this time, I faced them with a mix of caution, calculated strategy, and unwavering determination. The path was far from easy, and there were moments of fear and doubt along the way, but I refused to let them paralyze me. I had witnessed the consequences of complacency and recklessness, and I was determined to protect innocent lives and uncover the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows. As I continued to navigate this treacherous realm of anomalies and creatures, I knew that my journey was far from over. There were still countless enigmas to unravel, and I had only scratched the surface of what lay beyond our understanding. But armed with knowledge, experience, and the unwavering support of my team, I was ready to face whatever came my way, one challenge at a time.